right. Welcome, everybody. We have some more people coming in from the waiting room, but welcome to the 2021 Housing Summit. As we get people in, I wanted to give a few instructions. As you come in, you'll be on mute. If you just be courteous to our speakers and our other presenters and go ahead and leave yourself on mute. We will have some different concurrent sessions and breakout rooms. So we will be giving some instructions on that as you go. And always remember, anytime you come back to the main breakout, to the main room, you will be on mute. With that, we are looking forward to the summit today. We have a lot of great information for you, and I'm going to go ahead and turn this. My name is Dr. Dave Miles. I'll be your host for today and handle the technology end of it. And I want to turn this over to Kim Herbstritt to take it away. All right, Kim, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Housing Coalition, I'd like to welcome you to this year's Housing Summit. This year's theme is Advancing Equity Policy and Housing Solutions, How 2020 Changed the Housing Conversation. Today, we will be taking a deeper dive into understanding the impacts of housing and really exploring strategies and solutions. We know that housing impacts education, health, and our local neighborhoods and economy, which is why the Housing Coalition, which is a regional multi-sector effort, why it's committed to advancing solutions to address this complex challenge in our region. Today, you'll hear from an array of experts of folks in the field of housing, as well as you'll hear from residents that have worked through the challenges of securing and maintaining housing, which is going to be, I think, a great conversation. And I would encourage you all to please participate in that. I would like to make just two kind of announcements before I turn this over to one of our title sponsor. One thing is for those of you who don't know, the City of Winchester is in the process of doing a housing study. I will be dropping into the chat a survey that if you all can take it at some point throughout the day, I'll keep dropping it in there, and Dave will drop it in there as well. But would really like for as many of you to take that as possible. And then secondly, I'd like to invite you all to do three things today. One, to not, don't fall victim to Zoom fatigue. I know that it's easy to get distracted and do multiple things, but really would encourage you to stay engaged today. We've got some amazing speakers really talking about some great, important, relevant information for us in our region. And then secondly, let's keep this conversation going. Today is going to be a great day, lots of great information, but we all need to keep talking about this and keep working on this. And so talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, talk to your coworkers. Let's keep this dialogue, this conversation going. And then thirdly is get involved. I know many of you are probably already involved in some aspect of housing, whether you're a real estate agent, you're a housing advocate, you're providing service to folks that are homeless. But I would encourage you to, if you're not involved, get involved. If you are involved, I would encourage you to consider getting involved with the Housing Coalition. If you are interested in more information about the Housing Coalition or getting involved, please drop your information in the chat and we will be in contact with you. So with that, today would not be possible without our amazing sponsors. Really appreciate their donation and support of the event, but also being willing to step out and support housing in our region. Our title sponsor today is Wells Fargo, and our platinum sponsors are Dr. Dave Leadership Corp, Virginia Housing, as well as Blue Ridge Association of Realtors. And our gold sponsors are City National Bank and Coldwell Banker. And I'd like to now introduce Mr. George Carnes, who's who's the Senior Financial Advisor for Wells Fargo, our title sponsor, to say a few words. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. So Kim already introduced me. I am George Carnes. I'm a Managing Director of Investments with Wells Fargo. And I'm really excited to be here today representing over 8,000 Wells Fargo employees in the state of Virginia. Wells Fargo is a longtime sponsor of the Housing Coalition of the Northern Shenandoah Valley. And especially during times like these in this pandemic, we recognize the importance of partnering with other housing professionals to educate our community on affordable housing and to know that it's attainable. Affordable housing is extremely important to us at Wells Fargo. It aligns with our philanthropic strategy to help address critical issues affecting underserved communities. Through our Wells Fargo Foundation, we've made a $1 billion philanthropic commitment to address housing affordability solutions by 2025 by focusing on creating pathways to affordable, safe, and quality homes through 4 distinct strategies. First, housing stability. Second, increasing a supply of affordable homes, expanding home ownership opportunities, and finally, driving transformation and innovation in local communities. We understand during these times, our communities need us most. And in response to COVID-19, Wells Fargo has provided $225 million to address community needs. By deploying philanthropic support to nonprofits to help individuals, families, entrepreneurs, and communities with a focus on assisting racially and ethnically diverse people disproportionately affected by the pandemic. One of our initiatives includes the Housing Stability Grant, which expands COVID relief by funding 15 organizations that provide free or low-cost legal assistance and representation for renters, particularly vulnerable people who are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. Some of these recipients happen to be right here in Virginia. We've also committed a focus to driving transformation and innovation in local communities through a $20 million housing affordability breakthrough challenge to uncover new and more rapid ways to increase the availability and sustainability of scalable housing affordability solutions. From financial education initiatives, products, projects, and innovative programs, Wells Fargo is dedicated to helping people achieve and sustain the dream of homeownership. The Housing Coalition of Northern Shenandoah Valley does such important work in our communities, and we are thrilled to once again support their efforts and partner with an organization that is community-centric. At Wells Fargo, we know that we are only as strong as the communities we serve. So again, thank you for today's event. I look forward to the great speakers that are coming up today and learning more about the situation that we have here in the Northern Shenandoah Valley and the ways that we can help those who need it.
Thank you so much, George, and thank you again, Wells Fargo. Quickly, before I introduce our keynote speaker for this morning, I do want to thank everyone who was involved in the planning of this housing summit. This type of event does not happen on its own, and speakers like Heather, who I'm about to introduce, are introduced to us by a number of different individuals. So I just want to thank the steering committee of the Housing Coalition for their involvement in putting together today's housing summit. Particularly Kim Herbstritt, who you just saw, Amanda Whitson with Coldwell Banker. She's also one of our sponsors, and Jennifer Hall, who works for United Way with me, who was our little team working on this together, and then Michael Wong with the Harrisonburg. In Harrisonburg. He's on our steering committee as well, and was a huge help in bringing some really incredible speakers to today's summit, and sort of the benefit of being virtual is we can bring folks in from all over to talk about what's worked in other communities and other areas. So I'm really excited to introduce Heather to you all today. I really appreciate her taking some time out of her very, very busy schedule to be with us today. So let me tell you a little bit about Heather. Heather Mullins Crislip is president and CEO of HOME, which is Housing Opportunities Made Equal of Virginia, and she has been the president and CEO there since 2012. Heather holds a BA in Economics and Political Science from the University of Mary Washington and a JD from the University of Connecticut School of Law. While living in New Haven, Connecticut, she directed the region's Welfare to Work One-Stop Center and served as assistant to the mayor for policy analysis, where she worked on workforce development and homeownership issues. In New Haven, she also oversaw a large investigation to assess the region's compliance with the Fair Housing Act, conducting analysis on impediments and making recommendations to improve the education, outreach, and enforcement of fair housing laws. After moving to Honolulu, Hawaii, Heather served as the Chief of Staff to Hawaii's State Senator and Chief of Staff and Executive Assistant to the Chancellor of the University of Hawaii, where she oversaw all external relations and advocated for the university's legislative agenda and the state legislature. Returning to Virginia in 2009, Heather oversaw the bipartisan policy projects for the Miller Center and the University of Virginia for former Governor Gerald Baliles. Got it. She also served as the state director of the Good National Transportation Policy Project and did significant policy work on higher education, among other areas. Currently, she serves on the board of directors for the Housing Virginia, and as director of University of Mary Washington. She's been admitted by examination to the state bars of Connecticut, Hawaii, and Virginia. As you can see, she's got a lot of great experience, and I'm so just again honored and thankful, Heather, that you could be with us today, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. That was a really kind introduction. Thanks for reading through and persisting through all of that. This is such a pleasure of the pandemic era to get to be able to extend our reach and really connect with communities that, I wouldn't normally want to be with you all early on a Friday morning, but it's delightful to be able to do it this way. So thanks for having me. It's really a deep honor. As you are thinking of questions, why don't you go ahead and type them into the chat, and if we have time at the end, I will try to get to those. So HOME's mission is to ensure equal access to housing for all. As I think was introduction, I have a long history in Virginia, but I think the one thing that was left out is that I grew up in Southwest Virginia. So I do have, some sense and a lot of connection with the more rural parts of our state. And that was one of the things that really attracted me to HOME, is that it is a statewide organization with this mission that is really inclusive and that we work to deploy in many different ways. So HOME was founded in 1971. So we are coming up this year, this September, we will be 50 years old. Which is quite a mile marker, I think, especially for a nonprofit that has our specific and really precise mission. We are known nationally for being one of the largest and oldest private fair housing organizations. So we are not a government entity. We are a private 501c3 that seeks to enforce the Fair Housing Act. We are known nationally for a lot of really big cases. In the early 1980s, we brought a fair housing case called Havens versus Coleman, which went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. It involved rental steering, or the practice of steering African-American applicants to different parts of the building or turning them away in Henrico County. The takeaway of that Supreme Court case was that private fair housing organizations like HOME had standing to bring the case on their own. So even when we find evidence of housing discrimination, but we don't have a bona fide person who's been discriminated against, we have standing as an organization to enforce the law. And that standing is really the way that most fair housing cases are brought, and the Fair Housing Act is enforced across America. So that was history right here from Virginia. Also in the 1990s, we were hearing through our counseling programs that it was really difficult to get homeowners insurance in African-American communities. We brought a case called HOME versus Nationwide Insurance. That ultimately was the largest jury verdict ever in a civil rights case, because the jury was so appalled at the depth and breadth of the systemic housing discrimination and redlining that Nationwide Insurance was engaging in. and really changed insurance practices across the country. And then recently in 2017, I settled the largest lending discrimination case between a private fair housing organization and a financial institution, and was able to bring about $5 million back for investment in homeownership activities within the community. So we think big, and we think really systemically about housing discrimination and the systemic racism that is played out in our housing markets. But for about 3 decades, we've also been the largest provider of housing counseling in Central Virginia, and one program that operates statewide. So we do down payment assistance and work with first-time home buyers. We take a lot of CDBG and Home Investment Partnership Act dollars, those federal dollars that flow through municipalities, and put it together into a region-wide down payment assistance and first-time home buyer work. We have done about 2,700 down payment assistance contracts in our history. And about 96% of our first-time home buyers are still in those same homes 5 years later. We were able to hold that statistic through the housing crisis. I think largely because there's a lot of value in educating first-time home buyers and in making sure that the products that they end up utilizing for homeownership are sound ones, and that they have really thought through the implications on a family's budget of purchasing a home. We also do foreclosure prevention, and this is a program that we operate statewide. So if you have homeowners that have gotten into trouble and need assistance with a loan modification, a short sale, or sale of the property, we have counselors that will act on their behalf in negotiating with the banks. I'll talk a lot more about what we're seeing in that arena next or soon, but we have not started to see a real wave of foreclosures that we'd anticipated. We also operate the state's only mobility counseling program, and this is aligned with kind of our larger efforts around dismantling segregation. So we work with people who have a housing choice voucher, often called a Section 8 voucher, and we try to find them places voucher in low poverty neighborhoods. So trying to leverage the public investment in the voucher to really make sure that that family has increased opportunity as a result. And then finally, starting in 2019, we started the state's first eviction diversion program. And obviously that has blossomed into something I would not have anticipated even just a year ago. Our model was to work with people who had an unlawful detainer. I think you all may know that Richmond has, and several Virginia cities have, just ungodly rates of eviction. Richmond actually has the second highest eviction rate in the country. I checked the Winchester MSA's eviction numbers, and you all are not nearly as high as a lot of the municipalities, but it is a really both chronic and crisis level issue in a lot of Virginia's cities. So we've had to grow that program exponentially in the past year as federal dollars came online to address evictions. So that's been a lot of our focus in this past year. But then finally, we do an awful lot of policy and research work. We try to really firmly focus the research and policy work that we do on fair housing and housing equity and investigating barriers to housing. But we also do a fair amount in the area of just general housing affordability and how we fix our system to make sure that people have safe and affordable places to live. So the rest of my talk I kind of scheduled or put into 2 buckets. I wanted to talk about what has changed in 2020 and 2021 and what is the same. And what we'll really see then is just kind of talking about the crisis and how COVID is playing out. Some of the updates that came through the General Assembly that were either went into effect in July 1st of last year or will go into effect in July 1st of this year. And then I'm going to go into just some data that I was able to retrieve about kind of the chronic affordable housing issues that you all have in the Winchester MSA. So the big story is what has changed. And 2020 is certainly, all of the cliches apply. It's unlike anything I've ever lived through. It's certainly not something any of us anticipated. As of late February, about a quarter of adults in low-income tenant households were behind on their rent. And I'll say there are many other surveys that I've come across in the past 6 months or so. This is not just a low-income issue. There are similar statistics at people at moderate incomes as well. But at least 7 million households are in some kind of forbearance if they have a mortgage, which is just astonishing. So we know that as the economic cloud lifts, and you all may be familiar that we got some good news on the unemployment front this past week, that unemployment claims are now down to the lowest level that they've been since before, a year ago. But all of this pent up, back rent and forbearances and mortgages is kind of like saved up misery. These are balances that generally do not go away. And are really going to impact folks as we start to see incomes rise or return to pre-pandemic levels. The backup of deferred rent and deferred mortgage payments is going to stick with us for a while and be something that we have to figure out how we're going to sort through. So I was going to give just a high level synopsis of the moratoriums and where we are with those. There have been so many overlapping moratoriums, and it's been a kind of a confusing time, I think, in the housing counseling world. Statewide, we had an eviction moratorium that lapsed on September of 2020. That was put into effect by Governor Northam. Virginia, as a Dillon rule state, municipalities did not have the power to explicitly offer their own eviction moratoriums. However, I do know there were many attempts by localities to kind of they can't impact the issuance of an eviction, but they could either slow roll or try to prevent their enforcement by sheriff's offices. So there were many different routes and loopholes towards getting to the same goal. Now, the CDC eviction moratorium, was a surprise to me. It was a surprise to everyone I know who works in evictions and moratoriums, offering the ability for a tenant to certify that they had pandemic-related need, get that to their landlord, and then be able to claim a moratorium. That originally was up on 12/31, so we did have some evictions between 12/31 and January 20th. It has currently been extended just till next week, so until 3/31 is, as I understand it, the current expiration of the CDC eviction moratorium. There have also been some court challenges on its enforceability. And so if it is extended, I would imagine this is still fairly short-lived, that we are going to have to deal with the back rent that has accumulated during this period of moratorium. Because that's an important thing to remember. A moratorium stops the ability to gain an eviction court ruling, but it does not erase the back rent that's owed in order for the tenant to stay in the property. The other kind of surprise to me, we have been doing foreclosure prevention work for decades. We still had a lot of the staff on board that had lived through, the 2009, 2010 foreclosure crisis. And so a year ago, I was ready to gear us up and put us back into, kind of a more accelerated triage mode. And we have not seen an increase in our caseload in foreclosures. And that plays out in statewide data. The reason is there have been just a lot of very generous offers of forbearances and deferments. All federally backed mortgages, so that would be any mortgage insured by the FHA or Fannie or Freddie Mac, are in forbearance. A mortgagee has the ability to request and receive a forbearance. Those will be up on June 30th of this year. So that seems likely to us to be the moment when we will start to see a lot more foreclosure prevention work walk in the door. It's important to note that if people are behind on their mortgage, it is not too early. They don't have to wait until a foreclosure notice is issued in, say, July of next year to try to attempt to do a workout. And reasons why people would want to do that. I just want to make sure everybody's clear on the two terms. A mortgage forbearance is the ability to forego payments, but the entire amount that would have been due during that period then is due at the moment that the forbearance lapsed. So in many instances, that's going to be, July 1st of 2021, that the entire amount of back mortgage is due at that time. If you have a client who's received a deferral or a deferment, those payments go to the end of the loan term. So in those cases, that person is at less of a risk for foreclosure. So if somebody has had a forbearance, I would encourage people who know that that entire amount isn't going to magically appear to them to pay it off in July, should start that process sooner than later. And our counselors can certainly help. I want to note that federally backed mortgages constitute about a third of the market for mortgages in America, and the rest is the private market. Many of the private lenders, the big banks and small, have offered similar forbearances, made similar forbearances available. But at this point, they are, not obligated to do so. So we probably will start to see foreclosures. And I would imagine that the private market will probably, take some cues from the federal market. And so sometime this summer, those will really start to happen. The other thing that is different from this foreclosure crisis or pending foreclosure crisis than in 2009 is that we are going to see that the loan to value ratios are much different. When we had the housing crash, it was the case in many instances when the amount owed on the property was either very close to the value because the prices had crashed. This time, the value of these homes can be much higher. And so the incentive to go ahead and foreclose rather to work out a deal is going to be higher in the private market and probably in the federally backed market as well. So it is potentially a very precarious situation for homeowners who find themselves in arrears. The other thing that changed is just the massive amount of money that rolled into Virginia to try to ameliorate these two crises, both the one faced by renters and the threat of eviction, and the one faced by homeowners. There have been two really notable programs that have come online through DHCD in Virginia. First was the Virginia Rent and Mortgage Relief Program. Which attempted through local intermediaries to pay back rent. And then there was the promise to pay mortgage back payments. But one of the rules was that if there was a forbearance available, that those payments wouldn't be available. So the vast majority of those resources went to address back rent and people who were under the threat of eviction. And then Virginia is just now rolling out a Virginia Eviction Reduction and Prevention Program, which is another $5 million or so in the cities and localities in Virginia that have the highest rates of eviction. We've also seen a lot of local eviction programming. At home, our program was launched by just the city of Richmond, looking to address the high rates of eviction. But the other side of this story, while we're seeing all this chaos and turnover and payment deficits in both the rental and the homeownership side, is we have seen just record high interest in homeownership and people wishing to start our own homeownership program. I think that has to do with several things. Probably most noteworthy is the continuing very, very low interest rates that are available to people to purchase in this moment, but also people's changing circumstances, being at home more, maybe wanting to set up a multi-generational household, changes in other circumstances that were brought on by the pandemic. But it is a really dynamic moment in the home ownership market. And at the same time, we're seeing a reluctance to sell by people who own existing units. And so there is just in our region, but also across Virginia, a really low inventory in homes that are available for sale. This article came out this week, and I thought it was absolutely fascinating. It has a national perspective, but it did zero in some on the Washington, D.C. area. But it made a little sense to some of the things that I just mentioned that I was finding, slightly confusing in looking at the housing dynamics in 2020. There is just very, very little affordable rental housing available. And they point to this, I'm sure you've heard the term a K-shaped economic recovery, that higher income households have not lost much during the pandemic, the ability to work from home and other opportunities that came available as a result of the pandemic have meant that upper income Americans have not fared nearly as poorly, while the lower income Americans have just been, really devastated by the economic fallout as well as the health crisis itself. But this article was really pointing out that this has been true explicitly in housing as well because of some economic movements that both seem both obvious and a little confusing. And they pointed out that renters, especially renters that had stable income, were already marginally within the homeownership market. The ones that already have stronger credit, have some assets, and have higher than average income decided to make the transition to homeownership, often to move to suburbs or to get out of cities, while lower and moderate income ones were floundering. So luxury rental units, or rental units that were serving younger folks or higher income folks, have seen an exodus, and there's not nearly as much demand for those rental units that served a higher income clientele, which meant that rents dropped in those segments of the rental market. But also, more people decided to move down the housing ladder in order to save money because of a job loss, because of just general feelings of insecurity. And there was already, as you all know, a shortage of affordable units. So as more middle income folks tried to squeeze into that affordable rental market, it has really seen rents increase in the affordable housing arena in the past year. Which has bid those rents even higher. Plus, and this is something we struggle with every day, because the eviction moratoriums have been frozen people in place. The natural, though very unhealthy churn that we often see in affordable units as people lose them to eviction just isn't there. So we are seeing just a very dynamic squeeze on the affordable rental opportunities available in the country. So now I'm going to pivot to talking a little bit about legislative changes that have happened in the past year and a half. Some we were very, very involved with that I wanted to make sure you all were aware of, and some that are just kind of on the horizon. The first thing that I'll talk about is that Virginia added 4 new protected classes to its Fair Housing Act. So for any of you who need a primer on the Fair Housing Act, the Fair Housing Act protects people and households from discrimination in housing or any housing related transaction based on your membership in a protected class. So the traditional protected classes have been race, color, religion, national origin, sex, disability, and familial status. Which means the presence of children in the household under the age of 18. Virginia has also added to its own fair housing law elderliness, which is unique within the country. But this year we added in Virginia 4 new protected classes. The first 2 I'll talk about are sexual orientation and gender identity. This is something that had been one of our top priorities for probably a decade, to want to end discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. To promote those, we had done several studies where we used email protocols to do testing Testing is a tool that Home uses to kind of root out illegal housing discrimination. But in this case, we were just trying to demonstrate that it was a problem. So we used a methodology that HUD had developed to kind of just ascertain the level of discrimination in these populations, where we did email testing to property managers to determine that one where it was clear that it was a same-sex couple and one where it was clear it was not. And we did these studies in Richmond, in Hampton Roads, and in Northern Virginia. And we found about a 44% rate of differential treatment between couples presenting as same-sex and those presenting as not. And I hope and I pray that this was the kind of work that we do to support policy efforts that can really translate into changes in the law. So for the past 4 years, we'd received bipartisan support in Virginia's Senate, but this was a year ago now, that we were able to get it through the House as well. And it was a part of the Virginia Values Act that was passed. So it is now illegal to discriminate against a prospective tenant or homeowner because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. The next new protected class in Virginia is arguably one of the most important things we could do for long-term housing opportunity for low-income folks, but also to help our efforts to desegregate and to integrate Virginia. And it's called source of income protection. And what this protection says is that you cannot discriminate against a potential tenant or homeowner based on how they're going to pay their rent. And the most practical way that this plays out is in housing choice vouchers, or the Section 8 vouchers. So a landlord no longer advertise and can no longer base a decision based on the fact that someone plans to use a housing choice voucher to pay for that unit. We similarly had done some studies and work to demonstrate that this was really holding voucher holders back. And this one we just did in the Richmond region, but we found that all the rental units that were marketed and available within a 1 month period, that only 16% of the units in Henrico County would accept a voucher, 18% in Richmond City, and 33% in Chesterfield County. So you can see that even though we are making a massive public investment in housing choice vouchers, we're not getting the value from that investment and giving people opportunities to use that voucher wherever they wish to use the voucher, when landlords artificially limit that as a criteria for rental. I would welcome you all to learn more about this protection. I think it is a game changer for low-income individuals and their ability to find housing in neighborhoods of opportunity. The final one was veteran status, and it is now a protected class under Virginia's fair housing law. We expect this to be of most use in the Hampton Roads region. We have not had any intakes yet of people who feel like they've been discriminated against based on their veteran status. Other things that have changed that might be of interest. In 2020, the General Assembly said that you can now use security deposit insurance rather than filing a security deposit itself. This is still at the landlord's discretion and choice to accept a security deposit insurance product rather than a full security deposit. But I think this is also a potential game changer for low-income communities, where getting the security deposit together can be a huge barrier. And the ability to get an insurance product that would cover the amount of a security deposit is actually a really low premium. You can now submit domestic evidence of domestic abuse to mitigate violence survivor. And then really historic investments in Virginia's Housing Trust Fund, which should see or greatly increase our ability to develop affordable housing units across the Commonwealth, from $14 million in this fiscal year to about $30 million in the next 2 fiscal years. And then 2 changes that just came out of this last session. Preserving the American Dream Act, which was an effort to ease the burdens of a foreclosure process, most notably increases the amount of time for a foreclosure. which is, just unbelievable that it was 14 days from the time of foreclosure could be filed to the date of sale to 60 days. Homeowners a little more time to try to work out a deal. And then an anti-NIMBY initiative by Delegate Bourne related to fair housing that makes it explicitly illegal for any municipal body, and this could include planning boards or any other kind of municipal body, when approving planning changes or developments, to explicitly say that they did not want to approve it because either the prospective tenants would be members of a protected class under the Fair Housing Act, or because it was low-income housing. All right, the next section of my talk, I wanted to go into just giving you kind of an overview of the affordable housing picture in the Winchester MSA. So I serve on the board of Housing Forward Virginia. We have changed our name. And they have a tool called Sourcebook that I'd encourage you to dig into, because it does pull out housing related data specifically for the Winchester MSA. And that's where most of this data came from that I'm going to talk you through today. So the median household income in Winchester, most of you probably are familiar with this terminology, but in the event that you're not, the area median income is a composite that looks at what the median income is for a given area. HUD and other federal funding sources kick in to assist when you are at 80% of that median. So households that are just a little bit below what the average income is. And that spectrum generally goes between 80% and 30%. And those are the kind of tranches of different levels of affordability that HUD looks at, and that we tend to, in the affordable housing world, think about in tranches of what's available. So the highest one is 80% of the area median income. And that household group in the Winchester MSA is about $53,000. So that is the point at which, from a programmatic and a planning and a policy perspective, we're starting to pay attention to whether there between the housing that's available and the housing that people can afford at that income rate. So the overall housing affordability index is that, so for folks that are at 80% of the AMI in the Winchester MSA, it requires about 30.8% of their income to afford the median housing price. Now, this is kind of composite number. It's not, I'm going to get to how the housing affordability impacts actual households in a couple slides. But this is just giving you an idea of where you shake out. And so that rate is slightly higher in homeownership. It would take about 33% of someone's income, so kind of spot on for affordability in the homeownership arena, and about 25.2% in the rental arena. And you can see on those slides too, it has your median monthly cost for homeownership in the Winchester MSA is about $1,479. And the median monthly cost for rental in the MSA is about $1,120. And this compares pretty favorably to the state overall. Hold on, I just got out of my. So overall in the state of Virginia, the housing affordability index is spot on where you all are, about 30.8%. For homeownership, it's a little less, 32.7%, and for rental, it's 27%, so a little higher in the overall state as a whole. I skipped the 60 and 50% of AMI because I didn't want to bore you too much, but did pull out the 30% of median household income. So these would be households that are making, are in the bottom quarter, basically, of income levels for your MSA. So 25% of the people who live in your region. And that comes out to be about 3,245 households in the Winchester MSA are at or below 30% of the median. And that comes out to just about $20,000 a year per household. And this is where what we have available in affordable housing just does not match the income levels that people have, and can put people into just really difficult situations. So it would take about 82% of those households' income in order to be able to afford the median household or home product in the region, or 88% of your homeowner, the average rate for home ownership, and 67.2% in rental. So this income bracket, our supply does not touch the demand in this area. Compared to Virginia overall, again, you're kind of in the same ballpark as the state. Overall affordability is about 82%, home ownership at 87%, and rental at about 72% for Virginia as a whole. So this is probably the chart that gives you the most real perspective on how many households this impacts and what they are actually paying. The last two slides were more a composite, just how are you doing in terms of the products that you have available, and whether they're going to meet a kind of a composite need. Cost burdened households means the households that are actually paying more than a third of their income on housing. So that is, the generally accepted rate at which you need to keep your housing costs at in order to be able to afford the other parts of your life that either are a consistent need, like food, or are emergency needs. So for your households that are under $20,000, that 30% of AMI, or about roughly 25% of the region, all of them, if they're renting, are paying more than a third of their income. There are just no units available that would meet that need. And those who happen to be homeowners, it's about 68% are paying more than a third of their income in housing costs. For the tranche between 20,000 and 35,000, it's about half of the homeowners that make that income bracket are cost burdened, and 2/3 that are renters. And even those between $35,000 and $50,000, renters are paying about 73% of those renters are cost burdened. So, it's a really clear line here. You don't have enough rental housing for people making less than $50,000. The products that are available just are not matching that need to give people enough room to be able to fully live their lives and take care of other costs other than housing. This I thought was really fascinating too, especially after I had read the Washington Post's analysis on what is going on in the rental market, is that you're seeing pretty sharp increases in the average median gross rent in the Winchester MSA. And, this only goes through Q2 of 2020, but I'll be really interested if you continue to see that rate of increase. And that's a pretty significant. That's about $150 higher than we were seeing, just about back in 2016. So that is a really interesting dynamic. I'm interested in whether you all have some local perspectives or stories on the escalating rent costs. Wanted to end, and I'm sure we can provide these slides, so if you want to get my contact information from there. We are home of Virginia. I think we can be of incredible assistance if you ever see instances of housing discrimination in the region, either specific cases or people who've experienced housing discrimination, but also trends or systems or policies that you see in your community that you think. And also remind you that for foreclosure prevention, we are definitely a resource. Intakes begin on our website, and we would be delighted to get more cases, either in fair housing or in foreclosure prevention from the Winchester area.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather. That was
my pleasure.
Really, really informative. And I learned lots of new things too. And especially when it comes to the Fair Housing Act and a lot of those laws, I think just good information for us all to have, and as we continue to try and protect those rights. So
Yeah.
thank you for that. And there were a few questions in the chat box, so I'll read them out and then see if you've got answers to some of them. So the first one was from Christopher Monroe. His question was about new fair housing laws, a scenario. A landlord with 10 units refuses to take rental assistance payments from the CSB. How would you proceed with this?
Yeah, I should have mentioned that. Long term, we think that the housing choice voucher protection is important, but this absolutely covers rental assistance that's coming online during the pandemic, or any other sort of rental assistance. So that landlord cannot refuse to take rental assistance from the CSB, especially, and the important thing there is with 10 units. Like all fair housing regulations, fair housing does not apply to landlords who have 4 or fewer units. So a landlord that has 10 units definitely meets the threshold to be covered under the Act, and refusing to take payment from a different source is absolutely covered under Virginia's new source of income law. So how would I proceed? You could either point that out to the landlord and that might resolve it, but if it does not, I would call home.
Great. Good advice, and great to have home as a resource for that. Okay, next question's from Karen Poff. Question about the source of income protection. A landlord has to accept the vouchers, but what if it doesn't cover the entire amount?
Yeah.
Can they still deny the application based on the family not being able to afford the difference?
Yeah, this is one of the things we are working through right now with the state's attorney general, actually. They have recently put out guidance on exactly this scenario. It has not been adopted yet, but it is out there, and I think it goes before the real estate board soon. But what the attorney general is saying is that we ran into this over and over in the first. Landlords often have a requirement that you make 3 times the rent, that you be able to demonstrate that you can make 3 times the rent in order to be qualified to rent the unit. The attorney general is saying they can still have that requirement, but it has to be just tailored to the tenant's portion. So let's say the rent is $1,000 a month and the tenant's portion is $250 a month. The landlord can have a requirement that they demonstrate that they have $750 in income a month, so that they could afford their portion of the rent. The landlord cannot insist that they demonstrate that they have 3 times the contract amount in rent, because that would still, just de facto exclude any housing choice voucher holder.
Great. And Christopher had a capital thank you in to answer his question, and
Sure.
Karen also said thank you. So looks like we answered those. Sandra Webster, Sandy as I know her, says, does this source of income protection apply to tenants that are using a housing assistance program to pay upfront costs?
That's a really interesting question. An upfront cost, I presume you mean some kind of security deposit assistance or something of the like. I think
knowing Sandy and her organization, I would assume yes, that's what she's.
Yeah. I would assert yes, that it does, especially if they're just saying, well, no, we just won't take that. And if that's the only reason. That's a really interesting question. It's not one I had thought about. I don't think I've ever encountered that in Richmond. So I would assert yes. And if they have, some pushback on that, we would love to talk to them about getting that resolved.
Great. Okay. I don't see any more questions in the chat box. I'll just give anyone else just a quick second if you've got a question for the chat box, or if you want to raise your hand or unmute yourself. I'm sure Dr. Dave can make sure you get unmuted if you've got a question and want to ask Heather, but we'll give it just a few more minutes since we have it, but want to thank Heather again for her time. And I know she's on her way out of town as well. Great. So I appreciate you again.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Yes, absolutely. What do you find most challenging about your work at home, and maybe most rewarding in the same?
Yeah. Balancing the influx of just individual cases while still making sure that we have time and space to take on some of the bigger systemic issues. I'll say, the last year has been one of the most difficult, but also one of the most gratifying years that I've had in this job. Getting those new protections was tremendous, and I think was kind of a generational shift, especially in source of income, towards greater housing equity. It was a policy conversation that was kind of hard to explain. Took us a long time just to educate around why it was important. We had, just a lot of pushback from the property management communities in Virginia. I think some of it from just lack of understanding, and some of it, because there are, costs, associated. But I firmly believe that will be one of the most important things that we get done long term for housing equity in the Commonwealth.
We did have one more question. Kim Herbstritt, my colleague and friend over at Blue Ridge Habitat for Humanity, said, what can we do to support your efforts?
Well, thanks. You can get on our mailing list because we do have a policy agenda that's slightly different than the Virginia Housing Alliance, for example. We are more focused on housing equity and fair housing issues. This year, we are trying to look at more complicated issues, especially around issues like inclusionary zoning. We would like Virginia municipalities at a minimum to have the ability to adopt inclusionary zoning. So what that would mean is, when you're doing a large scale new development, we believe, and Fairfax County has been grandfathered in and been able to do this for decades, that the municipality should be able to say, a portion of those units have to be available to people in lower income categories. To try to build in affordable housing through every community purposefully, because otherwise, as we've seen, it just won't get done. So we need to deploy some policy tools. Some of them are very boring. No one wants to talk about zoning, but that are really, really important if we're trying to build a community that is both racially and economically integrated. And ultimately, those are the healthiest communities.
Great. We have time for one more question from Danny Fleming. Do you have some current insights on the housing supply and incentives for landlords becoming involved?
Yeah. This is a little out of my arena. If you're talking about affordable housing production, because that's not it's something I know some about, but not as much as those who do that work every day. The nonprofit developers that I work with rely a lot on CDBG and, low-income housing tax credits and the like. And I do think there is some argument that we need to figure out how to use less subsidy in every affordable unit produced. And figuring out where we can reduce costs. Some of that is nonprofit developers not having to fight NIMBY fights every time they want to do a development. But generally, I would say, yes, we need to have some incentives. I do think that we have some work to do in the nonprofit development world, how we reduce the total amount of subsidy that needs to go into every unit, just because we're not producing nearly enough with the current model.
Great. Well, thanks again, Heather, for your
pleasure.
time today and for this awesome presentation and just giving us your knowledge and just this great resource.
It was my pleasure. I really, really enjoyed being able to dig into Winchester. Thank you for the chance.
Great.